Greetings and welcome to the Reading Frederick Douglass Together Best Practices for Programming webinar. I am the program officer for Reading Frederick Douglass Together, Toya Bosworth, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about some of the best practices that have been developed, but also that as program officers and staff that we have seen that have been great examples for hosting Reading Frederick Douglass Together. And these are things that we hope that you keep in mind as you are preparing for your Douglass event and submitting your application. So before I do that, I just want to remind you who we are at Mass Humanities. We are a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we create opportunities for the people of Massachusetts to improve their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. We receive our major support from the NEH as well as from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and we are committed to being responsible stewardships of these resources and supports, and we do that through the guidance of our statewide board of directors and our creative, efficient operations of staff. So we're going to do this today in terms of what, and we'll ask all those W questions and then the H question. And so the first question is what, which is Frederick Douglass's address. And it is available in 3 versions on our website. So we have a short, a medium, and then the full-length speech. You can choose whichever version of the speech you would like to use for your event. I will say that our most common is our medium version, and that's also the version that's translated in Spanish and Haitian Creole. When we download the speech, we can look at things such as our interactive map, which provides for us places where Douglass spoke throughout the state of Massachusetts and additional resources, which will help you to provide historical context to the speech and to Douglass and all of his work. We also encourage you to look at things through a cultural and historical lens by reviewing some of the work of one of our other fellows who really looked at shared storytelling as a way of celebrating and as a way of truth telling and as a way of resistance. So again, providing historical and cultural context to the speech is helpful, and that is available on our resource page for Reading Frederick Douglass Together, as well as our QR code. We know that most oftentimes folks will print copies of the speech. Some folks even recollect them and then use those same copies again to save money or to save papers. But also you can download it. We know that we are also moving to a digital age. We are in a digital age, and that oftentimes it may be easier for people to just scan the QR code that's featured here, and then they're able to download the medium version of the speech. And so again, this is also helpful for you. You can do something such as like post a sign, put it on your poster so that people can see what the speech is about when you're promoting it. It can also be, on a table. If you have a table set up, you can just kind of frame an 8x10, or you can make it a part of your bigger posting so that folks are able to just scan it, and then that way they're able to go and read the speech along. This is helpful if you are in a public place, such as the event that's hosted in Boston with in front of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment statue, in which there are passerbys who come along. And so if you run out of copies of speech, they can scan it and they can join in at any time. So that is the speech, right? Why we are here. Secondly is the when. So typically most readings are taking place through Juneteenth, from Juneteenth all the way to the 4th of July, maybe those dates after, since his speech was on July 5th. However, we opened our grant line up December 16th of this year because we want to encourage people to explore Douglass's words and what he meant all year long. So we can do things such as Black History Month, which is also the implied month of his birthday. Sometimes folks have used them as an anniversary of other liberation movements and events, and also as like maybe freedom days or emancipation or abolition days of when maybe slavery was abolished, or in a particular city or in another country. So other multicultural groups can also look at liberation and events that they could align Douglass's words, right? So even though it was written about the 4th of July, we know that his words, really the essence of the speech is regarding what equity and democracy and freedom means to us, right? To others who are usually not included in celebration. And so that means many marginalized and historically underrepresented and excluded groups. And so you can really kind of tie in and align Douglas's speech with any of those things. So we've have had readings that have taken place in September, even in December. So you can definitely host a reading as a part of any event, ultimately. Where do these readings take place? Well, it can take place basically anywhere. We have had readings happen at museums, libraries, at public squares, online, virtually. We've had them happen at schools, at churches. So they can happen virtually anywhere. But when we are thinking about our place in which we want to hold it, it's very important that we think about things such as accessibility, right? How do we make sure that everybody has that opportunity to attend the event? Well, one thing is to try to think about, is there public transportation available, depending on where you are in Massachusetts, available that could get a person to the event, or is it in walking distance, or is it in a place where it is just a general walking area? But really thinking about, can people actually get to the event? And also thinking about making sure that it is ADA compliant, wherever it is that we're holding the event, or there's some way for people to enter the building. So is there a ramp available, or an elevator, or some other way to get folks where they need to go if they cannot? Also, when we think about where we're going to hold the event, we want to think about weather. For those folks who are hosting between Juneteenth and July 4th, it's New England. It could rain like it has oftentimes. There was one summer where it rained on almost every reading. And also it can be sweltering hot to where it is oppressive. And so you want to keep that in mind when we think about where. So should you choose to have a place that's indoors, uh, you're fine, right? But if it's but unless there's no AC, of course. But then if you are choosing to have an event that is outdoors, you want to think about things such as having a rain date, or thinking about, if there's rain, do we have tents, or do we have things to cover them up? Same thing with the sun, right? So we want to think about where the sun is in that setting, because sometimes we choose to have it on a place where the sun is beating down on people, or it's facing their face and then it's blocking their eyes. So unless we have tents, or people are wearing visors or what have you, that can make it difficult. So we really want to think about those extremes that could happen with weather. You also want to think about, is there, like, if you plan on having like a long event, you also want to think about, is there like a bathroom? Is there some other places? Is it, that people, if they need to use the restrooms, is there public restrooms? Is it, if it's at a park, where are the park restrooms? Things such as that. Really want to pay attention to that when we want to make sure that everybody's included. And then you want to think about the communities in which we're hosting it. There are some communities that are rich and diverse and that are welcoming to hearing this speech. But also there are people in different communities who may not want to hear it, who do things like deface statues, or cause stir up issues at events for whatever reason, right? And so we want to think about who our demographics are. Is this a space where there's not a likelihood that it's going to be interrupted, or that someone's going to feel unsafe driving to or getting back from, and what we could do to kind of mitigate that. We also want to think about if we're having it at a festival, we want to be cognizant of what time during the day of that festival we're having it, as well as the audience. Sometimes it's, a lot of noise, a lot of things in the background. So we want to be cognizant of where we hold it at within the festival. Just like if we're at a park, we want to be cognizant of where we're facing, and where's their shade, and where's their, restrooms or public safety and things such as that. Now, to help you with as far as safety, there is an event safety guide that you can download. And what that does is that basically goes through, ways to ensure safety and just things to think about as you're setting up your event. So the who, when we think about who's doing the reading, who's participating in the reading, this reading is for everyone. Even though some of the words are could be difficult for maybe younger folks, there are ways in which to either break it down and to explain it. Especially we see that a lot with school and youth groups, where they're starting the process of being able to really read it in smaller parts, or dissecting it in different ways, or choosing a shorter version of the speech, or choosing snippets of the speech. So there's different ways to do that, but we have school and youth groups that can do it, and that we encourage you to invite. So if you are a church, invite these other groups. If you are a part of a community center, invite these other groups too. So we definitely want to see that cross organizational collaboration. It's happening at community and religious organizations. It's also happening at veteran organizations, assisted living organizations, and also legislators. We want legislators a part of it. It's important that we include legislators because they're the ones who are able to make those decisions around where our funding goes, right? And so when we are able to fund things like reading Frederick Douglass and other humanities events, it allows us to really, again, build a more equitable commonwealth. And so we want legislators to see what Mass Humanities is doing, but what your organization and your community is doing. So include different audiences in your group. The next is the why. And so with this part, I want to get into scholars and I want to get into discussions, right? Why do we have that? Again, it is not required that you have a project scholar or that you have a discussion, but it is strongly encouraged. And here's why. One, we want to provide historical context to the speech. For some people, this may be their very first time hearing this speech or hearing about Frederick Douglass. And so we really want to provide the historical context, like what the speech was about, who he was addressing in the speech, why it still resonates with us after all of this time. We also want to connect it to current topics of democracy and equity. Again, he is talking about what it is to be Black, but he's also talking about the American experience and what freedom means and the contradictions in the establishment of this country as to how it was in that current time. But that can definitely be aligned with some of the issues that we're facing today in America. And so having that will connect it to that and then perhaps create a platform, right, where we can generate ideas about how to empower communities. And we can also foster those skills and capacity for engaging in difficult conversations. These are difficult conversations. And so we want to start to build capacity and hold space where people are able to do that. Perhaps for some people, the very first time that they're able to articulate or have a conversation where there may be a disagreement, where there may be conflicting views, but building capacity for us to be able to continue to have those conversations. The next is the how. Yes, 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 the how. We have so many resources available to support you here at Mass Humanities, and we're constantly building on those resources. And then there are also some things that you can do. So how? First and foremost is download the Trauma Informed Guide. It is going to help you talk about how to start the reading, things that you can do in terms of format, right? Like for the reading, it gives you suggestions for how to end the reading. It also, the event safety guide really talks about how do I stay in contact with other staff so that I know, for instance, that if somebody is too hot and getting hot outside, is there somebody that can support them? How do I perhaps like having things such as walkie-talkie? So it really gives some concrete strategies for event safety for everyone, physical safety as well as psychological safety. The trauma guide really focuses more on that psychological safety. Sometimes we're so used to doing this speech as a part of our annual traditions and a part of our annual events that we disconnect from the trauma that's associated with that, right? This is a speech, and Douglass is speaking his lived experience, and that's a painful experience if you really look at the things that he's discussing, and that can really invoke some racial trauma, some discomfort, or even re-traumatize folks. And so that's why this is important for you to kind of read through that and think about what pieces from it you can pull. It's set up to where you can have options for how you want to use it. We're going to go back to accessibility when we talk about how. I know in some spaces people are like, I'm loud, I don't need a microphone, but we want to make sure that we do have a microphone, unless we are, of course, in like a small room and it's just us, right? But if we are on any sort of stage or public platform, it's very important that we have some audio, because there are people who may not be able to hear you in the back just because, and there are people who might also have a hearing disability, and so they may need to be able to hear you. So we also want to think about speech as well, and thinking about making sure that people are able to hear it, but also, if possible or if necessary, is there someone available who can do sign language? Is there things such as like maybe being able to have ways in which folks can, magnify the speech words, because we try to keep it in a certain font so the package is not this big, but can you make maybe the font bigger? Or is there a way to highlight particular parts so that it may make it easier? But really thinking about all the ways in which we can include people. And so when you think about your how you want to do your event, ask yourself a couple of questions. Like one of them is who who might doing it this way exclude, and what harm, right? Unintended harm could be caused by doing it this way. So those are the things you want to think about. When we think about the how, there are so many different ways in which you can do it. There are some organizations that do things such as assign parts. So they pre-assign parts, people memorize them, and then they're able to do it almost in a way of acting. There are some ways in which people do it really organically, and whoever jumps in line can jump in line. Sometimes the speech is there are maybe a certain number of people already designated. So maybe there's 10 people and we're going to go back and forth with reading it. So sort of like performers. Sometimes it is impersonators. There's so many different ways in which to do the speech. Sometimes it's broken up where there's one part of the speech and then there's maybe a break or an activity and then we come back and do another part of the speech. So get as creative as possible. I urge you to, one, book something with me if you're unsure about those ideas and you want to talk them out, but also if there are any Frederick Douglass readings that you see from Math Humanities on our YouTube page, check those out so you can see different ways. One way that can help keep it organized is to assign numbers, maybe number each speech. So every speech, if I hand this speech out to you, yours might say 23 for line 23. I hand it to you, yours is going to say line 24. So you can do that. Maybe you can cut it into strips and just hand out the stripped parts to people so then that way they know, right, what they're going to perform, and then give them a copy of the speech to read along, but they know that this is their part. There's so many different ways you can do that. Another thing is that I've been finding more and more helpful is to have two lines if you're going to have multiple people do the speech. So having two microphones and two lines, what that does is that sort of like cuts down on the time for people to transition to the stage or to the front, but also by allowing them to kind of keep the flow of the reading going. Sometimes people will talk about the part of the speech and why it means something to them, and then read a portion of the speech. So there are so many different ways in which you can do that. We also do, there's a lot of things where people do things, what we call like inviting cultural ambassadors, right? And what I mean by that is having things that are connected to African American culture as well as diaspora culture, and just sort of doing things such as like having drumming or singers or singing the Black national anthem, things such as that. So incorporating other things that are built into the resistance movement, built into the social cultural history of African Americans or other groups. So any of those things could be included as a part of that. People are starting to incorporate art, maybe having somebody draw in the background while people are reading, or having people create while reading, or having the words to the speech in an outline of Douglass's like if you see this thing behind me, if this was an outline, maybe having the parts of the speech written in there and having people color around. There's so many ways to engage. We've had groups make it a part of a tour. And so at each part of an Underground Railroad tour, they can read a different part of the speech. There are so many different ways. We encourage you to get creative. We love to see the innovation in the speeches. And we also recognize that due to staffing and organization sizes, that sometimes all we can do is host a speech and discussion. And that's okay too, but we definitely encourage you to get creative with it. And so lastly, I want to close off with questions and support. Again, most of these resources, the Trauma Informed Guide, our grant guidelines, our event safety guide, are all available on our resources. The interactive map, the copy of a paper that talks about the history of shared storytelling as forms of resistance and joy. All of this is available on our website, and we are, like I said, constantly building more and more resources to support your readings of reading Frederick Douglass together. But again, if there are things that you have questions about in terms of logistics or any part of the process, you can email me at the address that you see there, as well as call me, and you can also set up a 15-minute meeting with myself to kind of talk about ideas or to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.